The 80s weren't just Spielberg and John Hughes. You know what Hollywood really did back then? They buried some of the decade's most mind-blowing movies because they thought you couldn't handle them. Movies so good, so ahead of their time, studios tried to pretend they didn't exist. Well, guess what? They were wrong. I've dug up 10 incredible 80s movies Hollywood hoped you'd forget, and it's time they got the attention they deserve. Here's one not everyone remembers, but totally should. Night of the Comet. A comet flies by Earth, wipes out pretty much everyone except two teenage sisters, and turns most survivors into zombies. These two sisters, Catherine Mary Stewart and Kelly Maroney, are not your typical 80s damsels in distress. They're valley girls, they're tough, they're funny, and they kick zombie ass. Sound familiar? That's because Joss Whedon literally said they inspired Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Made for just $700,000, and most of the post-apocalyptic LA scenes were shot illegally at dawn on Christmas morning, when the streets were completely empty. They even borrowed skeleton props from Halloween stores. Nobody expected much, but this movie caught on and made like $14 million. Quentin Tarantino said it influenced Death Proof. Don't watch Tampopo hungry. That's my first tip. It calls itself a ramen western, and that's exactly how it plays out. Like a classic western, except the cowboys are ramen experts instead of gunslingers. Yuzo Itami directed it. His first film after a long career as an actor. It's about a woman who owns a struggling ramen place and just wants to learn how to make the perfect bowl of noodles. Ken Watanabe shows up here, pretty early in his career. Toho funded this one, and they gave Itami a hard time because he insisted on keeping all these weird little side plots. Like this gangster who's totally obsessed with food in a very, erotic way. But Itami didn't budge. And guess what? It actually worked. The movie got huge attention at the Tokyo Film Festival, then even crossed over into American art house theaters. Made over $1 million in the States alone, which is pretty wild for an 80s Japanese comedy about noodles. Today it's legendary. Paul Thomas Anderson said it's one of the funniest films ever. Pon Joon-ho mentioned it as an influence on Parasite. And ramen restaurants in Japan literally use scenes from this movie to train their staff. So, that's how good the noodles look. This is one of those romantic comedies that's genuinely funny. Jeff Goldblum is perfect as a depressed American actor stuck doing terrible theater in London. And Emma Thompson shows up in her first film ever, and you can immediately tell she's got something special. Written by Richard Curtis, who later wrote Notting Hill and Love Actually, and directed by Mel Smith. It bombed in theaters, barely made £500,000 in the UK, didn't really play at all in the States, but found its audience on VHS and late-night TV. Curtis later said he wasn't sure if he'd ever get another chance to make a movie, so he basically put every single joke he could think of into this one. So yeah, critics weren't sure what to do with it. Some loved it, some thought it was too weird. But now, total cult gem. Basically, the start of Richard Curtis's entire rom-com empire. Sometimes real life is so weird you don't even need to make stuff up. Like the story of Melvin Dummer, a random guy working at a gas station who says he picked up billionaire Howard Hughes one night, gave him a ride, and years later finds out he's mentioned in Hughes's will. Of course, that whole thing turned into a big mess in court, and the jury said the will wasn't real. But director Jonathan Demme and writer Bo Goldman figured it didn't really matter if it was true or not. It was just a great story either way. They made Melvin and Howard in 1980, with Paula Matt playing Melvin and Mary Steenburgen, who actually won an Oscar for her role. And she'd barely done any movies before this. Melvin Dummer himself even showed up on set to help out. Cost under $5 million to make, didn't earn a whole lot at first, but after those Oscar wins for the screenplay and Steenburgen, it picked up a little cult following. Now it's one of those movies that's right between gritty 70s stuff and the more quirky, oddball vibe of the 80s. Criterion re-released it later. Paul Thomas Anderson said it was a huge influence on him. And of course, Demme himself went on to make stuff like Something Wild and eventually Silence of the Lambs. This movie's really where all that started. Lots of dystopian movies came out in the 80s. Blade Runner, RoboCop, They Live. But Brazil often slips under the radar, especially in America. And that's a shame because it's one of the wildest, darkest, funniest sci-fi movies you'll ever see. Directed by Terry Gilliam, it's basically about this guy trapped in a nightmare of bureaucracy, surveillance, and just total government insanity. Universal hated it, wanted Gilliam to make it shorter, happier, nicer. He said no way, and even took out ads in Variety calling the studio out. He secretly showed his own cut to LA film critics, and guess what? They loved it, gave it Best Picture, before the movie even opened. So Universal caved. The visuals are insane, inspired by Orwell's 1984 and Metropolis. Gilliam even built those crazy sets from real, thrown-out industrial pipes. Cost $15 million, didn't make it back right away, but it became a cult classic later. Gilliam calls it the movie that cost him sleep, money, and friendships, and he'd still do it again. Come and See isn't just another war movie. It's one of the most brutal, realistic war films ever made. Directed by Elem Klimov, it's about a teenage kid in Nazi-occupied Belarus just trying to survive. And Klimov wasn't playing around. He fought Soviet censors for 8 years to get it made. No Hollywood action scenes here, no dramatic music either. Mostly just raw, on-location sound design. The main kid, played by Alexei Kravchenko, was only 14, and Klimov put him through hell for realism. Starvation, exhaustion, even live ammunition firing above his head. They burned down real villages, already slated for demolition, used real explosives. This kid's hair literally turned gray from stress. When it finally came out in the Soviet Union in 1985, people were blown away. Huge critical success, sold nearly 29 million tickets domestically, sixth biggest Soviet movie that year. It took years to reach the US, but now directors like Roger Deakins and Gaspar Noé call it the most essential and disturbing war movie ever. Sidney Lumet made a ton of classics: 12 Angry Men, Dog Day Afternoon, Network. And when you've got a list like that, some of your stuff gets overshadowed. Prince of the City is one of those films. Basically, it's a neo-noir about an NYPD narcotics detective who gets pulled into investigating police corruption for the feds. Problem is, he's gotta name names. He ends up ruining his own life, betraying friends, and questioning basically everything he thought he believed in. Lumet nearly drove himself nuts making this movie. The script was something crazy, like 240 pages. Final cut was almost 3 hours long. You've got 126 speaking roles in this thing. Treat Williams took the lead after Al Pacino turned it down, and Lumet brought in real cops as advisors. Whole thing shot documentary style on location in New York. It cost about $8.6 million, but only made around $8 million back. Total flop financially. Critics, though, they got it. Won Best Picture at Venice, Oscar nomination for the screenplay. Lumet later said it was his most personal movie ever. And honestly, if you like gritty, real crime dramas, it's 3 hours well spent. Desert Hearts could easily be just another romance movie. A woman goes through a messy divorce, moves away for a fresh start, and meets somebody new in town. Seen it a million times, right? But what made Desert Hearts stand out back in the mid-80s was that it's about two women falling in love. And not just any women, these characters feel like actual normal people you might meet in real life. Helen Shaver and Patricia Charbonneau make this whole thing work. Their chemistry feels natural, believable. Directed by Donna Dage, her first feature ever, and based on Jane Rule's novel, Desert of the Heart, the whole production was independently funded. Studios tried to step in, offered money if Dage changed the ending to something tragic. She said no way. The result was one of the very first American movies to show a lesbian romance with a happy ending. It premiered at Telluride, got a ton of attention at Sundance, and ended up grossing over $2.5 million. Huge success for an indie drama back then. Even Scorsese later called it one of the best films of the decade. Pretty big deal. Liquid Sky is as 80s as it gets. Completely wild, neon, low-budget sci-fi weirdness. Director Slava Zuckerman emigrated from the Soviet Union, barely knew English, had never directed an English feature before. His wife co-wrote the script and even threw in money they'd originally saved up to open a restaurant. You've got aliens landing on a rooftop in downtown Manhattan, but instead of typical sci-fi stuff, they feed on people's orgasms. Yeah, seriously. Anne Carlisle plays two roles, a female model and her male counterpart, all dressed up in wild costumes and heavy makeup. Budget was about $500,000. No permits, no big names, just DIY filmmaking all the way. Neon gels, fluorescent paint, plexiglass, it looks insane. Even the soundtrack was groundbreaking, one of the first fully electronic scores ever for an indie movie. It premiered at a festival in Montreal and quickly blew up into a midnight movie phenomenon. Liquid Sky ended up making around $1.7 million, which is nuts for a no-budget underground sci-fi movie from 1982. Total cult classic status today. Paris, Texas starts with a guy named Travis wandering alone through the Texas desert. He's been missing for 4 years. His brother finds him, tries to get him back on his feet. Travis starts opening up, reconnecting with his son, trying to put his life back together. It's slow and quiet, but somehow totally fascinating. Director Wim Wenders shot it on the road, no big studio setups. The script, more of an outline really, was by Sam Shepard. They were rewriting dialogue on set constantly. There's this famous scene, Harry Dean Stanton giving a heartbreaking monologue inside a peep show booth, all shot in one long take. Pretty amazing it turned out so well. It premiered at Cannes in 1984 and cleaned up. Won the Palme d'Or, got huge critical acclaim. Cost less than $2 million, ended up pulling over $22 million worldwide. Turned into Wim Wenders' biggest commercial hit, and probably the role Harry Dean Stanton's most remembered for. A quiet, beautiful movie you can't forget once you see it.